Welcome, everyone, to the VBC Bible Institute, and welcome to another session in our course, Journey Through the Bible. Yes, yesterday, I believe it was yesterday, or I don't know what day it was, our last session, whenever that may have been. Yes, I believe that was yesterday. That was Tuesday. Yes, and our last session, we finally have left the staging facility, and we've come right up to the border of the land marked Old Testament, right? Or the land Bible, which is broken into two sections, Old Testament, New Testament, right? Okay, we talked about all of this. You'd have to go back and listen to everything we've done in this course. We've talked about a lot of things. And the first area we come into this land of the Old Testament is the book of Genesis. We did kind of a review, kind of an overview of the outline. And I'm not going to go through all of that again. But we finally got into the text itself. Genesis chapter 1. And I want to make this very clear. I just want to make sure you do not miss this, all right? Because so many times when people opens up their Bible to Genesis chapter 1, it immediately turns into an argument about creation. Okay, what does the word day mean? Was everything created in 6 literal 24-hour days or over a large period of time? Is there a gap between Genesis chapter 1 verse 1 and Genesis chapter 1 verse 2? And that dominates everything. And I stated it in our last session, and I'm going to state this again. I'm going to be as forceful as I can. So many times what we do is we take a chapter, and I just want you to just please get this down. We get the first chapter of the Bible, and the first chapter of the Bible gives us, in a sense, the subject of the Bible. It gives us the most important thing of the Bible. It gives us the most important person of the Bible. It gives us everything we need to know. In the beginning, God. This is the chapter that establishes to us that the Bible is God-centric, that it's about God. We have to start with God. If you want to end with God, you have to start with God. The Bible starts with God, and ultimately it ends with God in His glory, new heaven, new earth, and how the book of Revelation ultimately unfolds. But it starts with God. And what we have a tendency to do is we open up our Bible. We're like, in the beginning, God, and then we say, okay, God, please, we need you to step aside for a few minutes, for a few hours, for a few weeks, for a few years, for a few centuries, for a few decades, because we have to fight with each other over what we think Genesis 1 is about. And it's like, no, it's about God. That's what you have to see in the chapter. If you miss God in the chapter and you want to just argue about all of these other things, and listen, I'm not saying these other subjects and issues are not important to discuss. They are, but you're missing the point of the chapter. So many times we get caught up in our little arguments that we miss the actual subject of the chapter and the verses we're arguing about. Beware of that. If we're going to take a journey through the Bible, one of the things I'm going to try to do in this journey through the Bible is help you handle the scriptures correctly. So I told you to really, I gave you an assignment to go through Genesis chapter 1 and look what did God do? All the things God did. What God is describing as doing in Genesis chapter 1. You were just supposed to go through and find all of that. Now, I haven't received any emails, so I don't know if anyone's completed the assignment. If you haven't, you need to stop right now. You need to stop right now and do not listen 1 second further. You need to go complete that assignment, all right? I took my own notebook. I have it right here, my own Bible, sat down at a table, and I did the assignment myself, because the goal here is I'm going through this journey for your benefit. But if I'm going to go through the journey through the Bible, then I'm going to benefit. I'm going to get the spiritual benefit. It's not just for your spiritual benefit. I'm going to get in on the good thing here, right? So and you're like, well, you're teaching it. I may be teaching it, but I'm learning with you. Okay. We're in this together. We're taking the journey together. Yes, I've been through the Bible who knows how many times, but hey, we're in this together and we're going to learn. All right. So please stop if you have not done so far. And again, if you haven't done on paper, it doesn't count. On paper, go through Genesis chapter 1. What did God do? What is recorded of God doing in Genesis 1? Because the chapter is about God. It is about God. Listen, I think the way we handle Genesis demonstrates a spiritual problem for everyone, for every person who's ever lived. We constantly place the material, the world, creation, self, pleasure before God. We get into an argument in Genesis about how God created everything, and we want to argue about how everything was created, and we place the argument about how everything was created before God, who is literally the subject of the chapter. Okay, he's the one doing everything. So I want us to go back and focus on what God did. Now, I also told you to draw 3 circles. Throw a pretty big circle and write God in the center, another big circle, put nothing in this, just leave nothing there, okay? And then the other big circle, put man in the center. And basically what this is to represent is a God-centric worldview where everything revolves around God. God is the center. That's how you view the world. The other one I left empty. You could put an M there, or you could write the word material or materialism. It's a materialistic, where the only thing in that circle, there isn't a God. There's nothing that transcends. It's just the materialistic view of life, where all we are is flesh and biological creatures. The things happen. There's nothing that transcends the material. The material is all there is. What we can touch, see, and feel. Everything else it doesn't exist. Okay, it's in our imagination. There's nothing that transcends it. Right, and then the other one, which is closely linked to the second one, is humanism, or man, where man is the center. A humanistic approach to life, where we are the center. It's all about us. It's about us. Okay, and so now, of course, if the materialistic world, then what are we? How can you put man in the center if the materialistic view of life is true? Because we're just evolved animals. We're just biological mechanisms, biological machines just operating, a living biological mechanism, I guess. I don't know what the correct term is to use, but what are we? Where there's nothing transcendent, there's nothing of intrinsic value other than survival of the fittest. And if you're stronger and you can survive over the weakest, that's again, kind of a bleak view of life. But those are the 3 basic worldviews you're going to get. You're going to get either a God-centric one, a materialistic one, or a humanistic one. And the humanistic one and the materialistic one obviously are very much together. So just keep those 3 circles in mind. All right, that's the world you live, as they're going to operate from a materialistic or humanistic perspective. The Christian, as soon as we take this journey, as soon as we entered into the land, the first thing we are confronted with, in the beginning, God. We are confronted with God. So God is how we need to get that understanding in our mind, that we need a revolution to occur in our mind, a revolution, a transformation, that our mind is God-centric and God-focused, and we see God. So I think this is an important exercise for you to go through. So I'm going to work on what I have, all right? So I think we can see the first one. I don't think there's any problem. In fact, I gave you the first one in the last session, all right? I gave you the first one. Here we go. Thought for a second I had lost my eyeglasses, which would be bad because I wouldn't be able to read anything. Okay. All right. Yeah, that's not good, right? The human body is frail and it does wear out. All right, here we go. So the first book of Moses, called Genesis. Are you ready? Here we go. In the beginning, God, there you go. That's he's central to the whole chapter. He's the subject, right? In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. So the first thing Genesis records God doing is creating. You see this concept, and you could go, and hopefully you list all the verses where you kind of see this being played out. But Genesis 1:1 is the obvious one, right? In the beginning, God. If you go down to verse 16, and God made 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. So you have him creating, and this using this word made, right? Now I know there can be some distinctions in how those words can be utilized. I understand that. I'm pretty sure they're 2 different Hebrew words. I'm almost positive. You can look that up if you want. But the main thing is I want you to see is the text is emphasizing God is creating. God is making. Again, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Verse 16, God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. All right? So there you have God making. He is involved in the creation of everything. Go to verse 21. And God created great whales and every living creature that moveth, which the waters brought forth abundantly after the kind, and every winged fowl after his kind. And God saw that it was good. Please note, God created. We see it in verse 1, see it in verse 16, see it in verse 21. We also see it in, I believe, verse 26. And God said, let us make man in our image, after the likeness and after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the fowl of the air, over the cattle, and over the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. And so God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him, male and female created he them. There you have it. So we have God creating, God making, God creating, God making. And listen, verse 1, verse 16, verse 21, verse 26, and verse 27. So this is absolutely essential. We start the book of Genesis with God. And what we learn about this God is that he is creator. He created everything. Now, I cannot stress this enough. This point is essential to the rest of the book. All right. This point is essential to our entire understanding of the Bible, our entire understanding of life. Let me explain. In the beginning, God created. He created. Make sure you get this down. The first thing we see God doing in Genesis is creating. The fact that he is creator, listen, means that everything created, listen to me carefully, the fact that God is creator, everything he creates, which is everything can only find its purpose and meaning in the one who created it. God is creator. You want to know the purpose of everything? It's found in God. You want to know the meaning for everything? It's found in God. Human beings are created in the image of God. Now, we'll get into that in greater detail, but just start with the idea that we are created. So where is purpose found? In God. Where is meaning found? In God. Look, if just go back, and that's why that second circle, which is the materialistic one, I just left empty. If there is no God, and in the beginning there wasn't a God, there's just, I guess, matter, and on one day it just blew up. Well, then I leave that circle empty, because where's purpose? Where's meaning? Why? Well, there is no why. It's just, it happened. There's no why to it. If there is no God, there is no why. There is no purpose. There is no meaning. You just exist because of a cosmic accident. And then there was evolution, where there was mutation and death and death and death and mutation. And then ultimately, just by random chance, okay, here we are. Well, what's your purpose in life? Well, you can say, my purpose in life is to be happy. Okay, well, what is happiness? Is happiness just a biological reaction happening in the body? In other words, there's no true something transcendent called happiness or joy. Is love? What is love? It's just chemical reactions in your body. So there is nothing. We're just here and then we're gone. There's no real purpose. There's no transcendent purpose. There's no transcendent meaning. So make sure we get this. God is creator. Therefore, all purpose and meaning can only be found in him. Now, this is very important. Very important. Listen to me carefully. If God is creator, which is the first thing we see God is doing, all purpose and meaning can be found in him. Listen, morality would therefore be determined by creator. The creator would determine morality on his creation. He would determine what is right and what is wrong for his creation. In other words, morality would be found in him. So because God is creator, purpose, meaning, and morality can only be found in God. If there is no God, where is purpose found? Well, whatever purpose we want to say there is. I mean, we just make it up. Meaning? Where's meaning? Morality? Well, this is what happens. Remove God, and now who determines what is moral? Who determines what is right, and who determines what is wrong? Who? Well, again, remember your options. The majority determines morality. Well, if the majority determines morality, that doesn't always work out, right? There was a time the majority thought it was acceptable to enslave human beings and buy and sell them as property and deny them basic fundamental rights. And the minority said that that's wrong. So the majority was wrong. And we celebrate the fact that the majority was ultimately overruled. So, does the majority determine morality? A lot of times people say no. Does the minority determine morality? Sometimes people say yes, the minority determines morality. And then you find some minority group out there who supports all kinds of the KKK, organizations that want, basically a man to be able to engage in physical relations with a young child. And you're like, no, that's horrible. That's abhorrent. Well, who determines right and wrong? The majority or the minority? And then we'll say, well, the majority determines. So sometimes it's the minority, sometimes it's the majority. Who really can determine what is right and what's wrong? And even if a majority or a minority determines something is right and something wrong, is it truly right or wrong, or is it just the temporary view of society at any given time? It can change. There's nothing truly transcendent. So where does morality come from? Where does purpose? In a materialistic world, there is ultimately no purpose, no meaning, and there's no morality. Because the other view is you have the majority determines it, the minority, or the individual. And if the individual determines it, then morality is what any individual thinks is morality at any given time. If there's a God, then there is a transcendent morality that God places upon us, and that we are to live according to him because he is the creator. Does that make sense? If he is creator, purpose, meaning, and morality is found in him. This is why Genesis is so critical. It starts off with telling us God is the focal point. God is the subject. God is what this is all about. This book is obviously going to be about God. It's going to be about God. God is going to be the central character in this narrative, in this story. And sometimes we get into the stories, and even the way we teach them in Sunday school, we don't make them about God. We make it about David. We make it about Noah. We make it about Moses. We make it about Samson. No, it's about God. God is creator. So purpose, meaning, and morality is found in him. I cannot stress that enough. God is creator. God is purpose, meaning, and morality is found in him. Right? So much more we could say there, but just make sure we get that. God is creator. All things were made by him. All things were made for him. What is the purpose of everything? God. What is the meaning in everything? It's found in God. What is morality determined by? God. What is the chief end of man? As the Catechism would say, to glorify God and to enjoy him forever. That's your purpose. That's where meaning can be found. That's where true joy can be found. True joy has to be found in the Creator. He is creator. So what's the first thing we see God doing in Genesis 1? Creating. Chapter 1, verse 1, chapter 1, verse 16, chapter 1, verse 21, chapter 1, verse 26 and 27. If you see any other verses there that kind of identify him as being creator, you can please write those down. I could have you start going through the rest of the Bible and finding all verses that identify God as creator or speaks of him creating. You could find plenty there, but I'm not going to do that because we'll get to them. Just make sure we understand this. The idea that God is creator, is a theme and a truth that is repeated throughout the Bible. Now, we get more information about the God who created as we go through the Bible, right? We're going to see God, and then we're going to see Jesus Christ, who's also given credit for creating everything and that everything was made by him. Well, wait a minute, God, Jesus, how does this work out? And then ultimately, when the revelation is ultimately complete, from Genesis to Revelation, that's when we already kind of get a hint of it in Genesis of this triune, one God, three distinct persons. But we'll get to that as we move forward. Right now, what I want you to see is what's clear in the text. He is creator. He is creator. Do not forget that. And again, what do we learn from the fact that he is creator? Well, we can learn three things obvious. Purpose, meaning, and morality comes from him. I think there's something else we could draw a conclusion from. I think we can agree. Speaks of his power. Speaks of God's power. Right? He is obviously almighty. He's obviously all power. He brings everything into existence. Now, I know we haven't even got into how he created, but we're just getting into the fact that he is creator. If he created everything, the heavens and the earth, and you go through all of Genesis, he created everything. Clearly, that speaks of power. Clearly, it speaks of power. So we learn a little bit about this God. He is powerful, and purpose, meaning, and morality ultimately has to flow back to him. Has to. It's the only place you can find it. Without God, you're left with nothing. That's why that middle circle that I told you to draw has nothing in it, because a materialistic world, what is just material? What is it? It just, to me, it loses everything, right? And you can try to, and what we tend to do, the materialistic world, we then say, we need something, so we put ourselves in the center, and then we become the object of everything, the purpose of everything, the source of everything, and we basically make ourselves many gods, and that's what humanism basically is. We remove God, but that ultimately doesn't work. All right, so the first thing, God created. Second thing, I think you can see it. Go to Genesis chapter 1. Okay, I thought the second one was something else, and I was going to make it kind of a little joke, but we won't. We'll get to that one next. The next thing that we see that God did, go to verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, and the earth was without form, and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. Now we could get here, but I didn't spend a lot of time on this one. We'll come back to that at some later time. But go to verse 3. Let's see. I want to make sure I'm not missing one. Okay, in verse 3. And God said, let there be light, and there was light. The second thing God did is he said, he spoke. He spoke. God spoke. He said, let there be light, and there was light. But I want you to see that God not only is creating, he is speaking. He's speaking, and when he speaks things into existence. Now, what some people do is take that and say that we can do that. That's absolutely fraudulent. We can't speak things into existence. Only God can, because he's God and I'm not God. Okay? I can't do that, right? I'm limited. God is unlimited, right? He is God. He's eternal. He's infinite, all those other things. We're finite beings. So let's look at all the times it speaks of God speaking. Genesis 1:3, and God said, let there be light, and there was light. Look at verse 6, and God said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. Look at verse 9. And God said, let the waters under the heaven be gathered together unto one place, and let the dry land appear, and it was so. Look at, that's verse, so we got verse 3, verse 6, verse 9. Look at verse, I believe, 11. And God said, let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit, after his kind, whose seed is in itself upon the earth, and it was so. All right. So again, God said, verse 11, that's verse 11. So verse 3, verse 6, verse 9, verse 11, look at verse 12. And the earth brought forth grass and herb yielding seed after his kind, and the tree yielding fruit, whose seed was in itself after his kind, and God saw that it was good. Okay, it's not in verse 12. Let me erase that one. Not in verse 12. Verse 12 is something else, which I just gave away. Here's my pencil. 1 second. Hey, we're in class, right? This is not supposed to be like a polished podcast. This is a class, all right? So I'm going to erase verse 12. Go back and read 12 again. Make sure I did not miss anything. And the earth brought forth grass and herb yielding seed after his kind, and the tree yielding fruit, whose seed was in itself after his kind. Okay, no. So it's not in verse 12. So let's go through them again. Second thing we see God doing in Genesis 1 is God is speaking. He speaks in verse 3, verse 6, verse 9, verse 11. Go to verse 14. And God said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let there be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. So we have verse 14, verse 20. And God said in verse 20. Look at verse 24. Look at verse 24. And God said, all right? So I don't think, verse 29, and God said, all right? So we have all the places where it shows God speaking. Verse 3, verse 6, verse 9, verse 11, verse 14, verse 20, verse 24, verse 26, and verse 29. Give those again. God is shown as speaking in verse 3, verse 6, verse 9, verse 11, verse 14, verse 20, verse 24, verse 26, verse 29. God said. God said. He spoke. Now, there's a couple of things we learn about him speaking. One, he speaks things into existence. He speaks things that were not there, and he makes them there. He brings them. God said, let there be light, and there was light. He speaks it into existence. So God creates, and one of the ways he creates, or what's demonstrated here, is he creates by speaking it into existence. That which wasn't comes into existence by him speaking. There is power in his word. So that's very important. Another thing we learn is God speaks, God reveals. He's a God who reveals himself. He reveals by speaking. By speaking, he reveals his will. He reveals his desire. He reveals his commands, his purpose. He reveals over and over. When God speaks, he reveals. He is a revealing God. God reveals. And ultimately, we believe he reveals through his word, the written word of God. But he speaks. So it's given us an idea about this God. He's a creating God, and he is a speaking God. Now, please note, the fact that he's creating and the fact that he is speaking destroys this idea of God being some impersonal just force. This is giving now the idea of personality, of a person. Right? Now, yes, he's a spirit, but he has the attributes of person. He's doing, he's speaking, all right? So keep that in mind because that's very important. We have a personal God here, not just some impersonal force. So God created, verse 1. So I'll go through these again so that you can make sure you have them written down. And you're supposed to have already done this work, So, I probably don't need to review, but I just want to make sure that everyone's on the same page. God, number 1, he created. Verse 1, verse 16, verse 21, verse 26, and verse 27. You may have some other verses there that indicate the same concept. God speaks, or God said. He's a speaking God. Verse 3, verse 6, verse 9, verse 11, verse 14, verse 20, verse 24, verse 26, verse 29. Now, the third one that you should see, now a little joke, you should see is the fact that the book of Genesis speaks of God seeing, that he saw. God sees, he saw. And I think this is very important, right? Look, it means he beheld, he comprehended, he understood, he perceived, all right? Go look at Genesis chapter 1 again. Genesis chapter 1, verse 4, and God saw the light, that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness, all right? He saw. Look at verse 12. And the earth brought forth grass and herb yielding seed after his kind, and the tree yielding fruit, whose seed was in itself after his kind, and God saw that it was good. God saw. Look at verse 18. And to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. All right, so we have God seeing in verse 4, verse 12, verse 18. Note verse 25. Verse 25, and God made the beast of the earth and all his kind, and cattle after their kind, and everything that creepeth upon the earth after his kind. And God saw that it was good. Please note, God saw. Look at verse 25. And okay, I think I already gave that one. And verse 31. And God saw everything that he had made. All right. So we have God creating in Genesis 1. Again, the chapter is about God. I want to make sure you see that. It's about what God did. He created. Okay, we saw that in verse 1, verse 16, verse 21, verse 26, and verse 27. God said, he spoke. We see him speaking in verse 3, verse 6, verse 9, verse 11, verse 14, verse 20, verse 24, verse 26, verse 29. God saw. So God said, okay, I think I said those backwards, so let me do that again. God created, verse 1, verse 16, verse 21, verse 26 through 27. God said, he was speaking, verse 3, verse 6, verse 9, verse 11, verse 14, verse 24, verse 26, verse 29. God saw, right? It speaks of him seeing, verse 4, verse 12, verse 18, verse 25, verse 31. Verse 4, verse 12, verse 18, verse 25, and verse 31. God saw, he beheld, he comprehends. Now, why is this important? Because this tells us something else about God. Not only is God the creator, therefore all purpose, meaning, and morality is found in him. God is creator. That tells us clearly he's all powerful. It speaks of his power and ability. All right, I think that's important. We could even take that even further, but those are some basic ideas. God said, that means it gives us an idea how he created. He spoke things into existence. His words have power, but it shows that he's a revealing God. He reveals by speaking. Next, which we're going to see throughout the Bible, he's revealing, he's speaking, he speaks by the prophets, speaks in different ways, dreams, visions, audibly, and then he's ultimately going to speak to us in Jesus Christ and through his word, right? We can go all kinds of different directions with that. He saw. Now, why is this important? It shows us that God is a God that perceives, he beholds, he understands, he sees, he's aware. This is awareness. This is seeing. This is comprehending. This is not just some blind force. This is personality. He creates, he speaks, he sees. This is a personal God. All right? Now, what else do we have here in the text? Well, I thought this one was interesting. You may think so, you may not. Another thing we see that God does, all right? Look at verse 4. And God saw the light, that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. God divided the light from the darkness. Look at verse 7. And God made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament, and it was so. God divides. He is a dividing God. He divides. Now, we could take that and look at how that shows up throughout the Bible, but you'll see God dividing, making a division, saying that is this and this is that. He divides things. He divides light from darkness, good from evil, truth from falsehood. He is a dividing God. There's a division there. And he calls for us to be different, and he draws a distinction. He makes a distinction. He divides. I just think that's important. He divides. Another thing he does. Look at Genesis chapter 1, verse 10. I think this is a good one. Genesis chapter 1, verse 10. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters called the seas, and God saw that it was good. Verse 10, look at verse 12. And the earth brought forth grass and herb yielding seed after his kind, and the tree yielding fruit, whose seed was in itself after his kind, and God saw that it was good. Right? Look at verse 18. And to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness, and God saw that it was good. Look at verse 21. Look at the last part of verse 21. God saw that it was good. And then verse 31, and God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. I'm going to say, and you may want to reword this, but I think this is a good way of putting it. Another thing God does, he judges. He's making a judgment there. He sees that it is good. He's making some kind of judgment there that what he sees is good. Now, good in what way? Good spiritually, good physically, but it's good. There's a judgment that's being made, and we're going to see that the God that creates, the God that spoke, the God that saw, the God that divides is a God that judges, and he's going to make judgments over and over and over and over from Genesis to the book of Revelation. God's judgments. He's going to make judgments by declaration. This is right and this is wrong. He's going to make judgments against people and then act on those judgments, carry out judgments. He will ultimately judge. And when you get to the end of the book of Revelation, he is a judging God. He determines what is good. He determines what is evil. He determines what is right. He determines what is wrong. His judgment trumps your judgment. Our judgment must be in submission to his judgment. I think that's very important, right? So let's go through this. He's a creating God. He's a speaking God. He creates, he speaks, he sees, he saw, he divides, he judges. Could we find possibly two more? Now, this is the situation where if we had people here, like this class was people in person, you would be doing the rest of this on your own. So hopefully, well, we'll just go through these and I'm just going to throw out some potentials. I wish, I almost kind of want to stop and wait for people to email me, but I won't. Here's another thing that he does. I think that's interesting. All right. Look at verse 26, Genesis 1:26. And God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the fowl of the air, over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him, male and female created he them. And God blessed them, and God said unto them, I don't know, did we have verse 28 down as one of the ones where he speaks? Let me look here. No, I missed verse 28. So put down verse 28 for God said, God speaks. I missed that one. Look at that. I missed it. But know what he says here. And God said unto them, look, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. And God said, behold, I have given you every herb bearing seed, which is upon the face of the earth, and every tree in which is the fruit of the tree yielding fruit. To you it shall be for meat. I'm going to argue this is a commanding God. He gives commandments. He's commanding them of what they are to do. Be fruitful, multiply, subdue. He's telling them what to do. He is a commanding God. He commands. He's a commanding God. He's a commanding God. I'll give you two more, and I'll have you look for these. Are you ready? He is a blessing God. He blesses. He blesses. Right? Can you find that one? Verse 28, and God blessed them. He is a blessing God. He blesses. And you'll see that throughout the Bible. There's times he's going to be blessing, and there's times he's going to be cursing. Blessing and cursing. He gives. He is a giving God. After he creates man in his image, he gives unto them. He gives. Notice what he gives. He gives something for them. He is a giving God. He is a giving God. So let's go through these again. All right, let's go through these one more time. Now, those last two, the blessing God and giving God, I did not give you scripture. You can look for those. But let's go through this quickly. Number one, God creates, verse 1, verse 16, verse 21, verse 26 through 27. God said, verse 3, verse 6, verse 9, verse 11, verse 14, verse 20, verse 24, verse 26, I think verse 28 as well, and verse 29. God said, he speaks. God saw, verse 4, verse 12, verse 18, verse 25, verse 31. He divides, verse 4, verse 7. He judges. In a sense, he's making a judgment by saying, it is good, it is good, it is good. He's making a judgment. Verse 10, verse 12, verse 18, verse 21, verse 31. And then three more. He's a commanding God. He commands the people he created in his image to be fruitful, to multiply, and to subdue and have dominion. There seems to be a commanding there. He commands them. He is a blessing God. He blesses them. He blesses them. He also seems to be a giving God. He gives unto them. Now, this lays out, again, that God is personal. He is involved. He speaks. He sees. He commands. He blesses. He judges. He gives. This is God, a personal God that is involved. This establishes the key character in the whole narrative. It is God, a personal God who does all of these things. When you're done with Genesis, here's the thing. When you ask people, hey, what did you get from Genesis chapter 1? It usually turns into, well, God created everything in 6 little 24-hour days, or no, God, and it talks about days and all of these arguments and was there an original creation and that it was judged and then there was a separate creation, and it can turn into all of those disputes. And you can sit in a Bible college classroom or a seminary classroom and listen to those disputes for 6 weeks, an entire semester, a year, whatever. But you're going to miss the point. Genesis 1 is about God. Please see that. Understand that. Meditate on that. And then after you meditate on all of those things that God did, right? He creates all of those things that he did. Just look at the verses that say God did, God said, God divides, God blesses, God gives a commandment, God, whatever, have all of those things. I want you to have them memorized. And then I want you to do this. After you've really meditated on them, I want you to take a second and write out a sentence, or maybe even 2 sentences, maybe a paragraph. Just write out a summary of what you learn in Genesis 1 based off seeing God as the key central figure in the chapter. No, I don't want you writing anything down about all the disputes and arguments about the chapter. I want you to write down what you learned about God. What you learned about God. It's significant. I want significance. I want you to summarize what you learned about God in the chapter. I want you to write down what you learned and its significance. Just observing the text, we see God doing this, God doing that, God doing this, God doing that. When that is over, what do I learn? I learn something about God. And why is it significant that I learn these things about God? What is the significant things I learn about from it? Meditate on what God did in Genesis 1. Meditate on it. Don't get into an argument about debating and arguing about the word day. Focus on what God did. If you miss that, we've missed the point. That's the point of chapter 1, is to tell us about God. Not for us to insert ourselves so that we now become the supposed master and expert over Genesis 1. No, we're not supposed to be the master and expert in Genesis 1. God is. God is. All right, I'll stop right there. There's a lot more we can say, but I at least wanted to get you started and kind of really thinking about it. Now, this is the way we're going to end this session. I'm going to play Genesis chapter 1 again. Now, please, when I play this, don't just tune me out. Don't just walk away. Don't just hit stop. Listen to the chapter be read again. Listen. Listen. Now, as you listen to, oh, God's doing this. God's doing it. Focus on God being the central subject and the whole chapter. Hear it. Think about it. All right. And I'll play this. And then the conclusion of the chapter being read, then there'll be the little copyright statement, and then I will just end. I won't be coming back in, so pay attention, all right? The quality of your study is based on the quantity of your reading, all right? And you've just been confronted with the God of the Bible, the God, the creator of all things. That's the subject you need to become. You have to learn that subject more than any other subject. I'm going to start preaching a whole different sermon, so I'll stop right there. Listen to this carefully. Email me at newsif@yahoo.com, newsif@yahoo.com. Any questions, any thoughts, anything I can help you with, please, let's do our best to understand this chapter. All right, here we go.
The first book of Moses, called Genesis, chapter 1. In the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, Let there be light. And there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And the evening and the morning were the first day. And God said, Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. And God made the firmament, and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so. And God called the firmament heaven. And the evening and the morning were the second day. And God said, Let the waters under the heaven be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters called he seas. And God saw that it was good. And God said, Let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed is in itself upon the earth. And it was so. And the earth brought forth grass, and herb yielding seed after his kind, and the tree yielding fruit, whose seed was in itself after his kind. And God saw that it was good. And the evening and the morning were the third day. And God said, Let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven, to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons, and for days and years, and let them be for lights in the firmament of the heaven, to give light upon the earth. And it was so. And God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. And God set them in the firmament of the heaven, to give light upon the earth, and to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And the evening and the morning were the fourth day. And God said, Let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creature that hath life, and fowl that may fly above the earth in the open firmament of heaven. And God created great whales, and every living creature that moveth, which the waters brought forth abundantly after their kind, and every winged fowl after his kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, Be fruitful, and multiply, and fill the waters of the seas, and let fowl multiply in the earth. And the evening and the morning were the fifth day. And God said, Let the earth bring forth the living creature after his kind, cattle and creeping thing, and beast of the earth after his kind. And it was so. And God made the beast of the earth after his kind, and cattle after their kind, and everything that creepeth upon the earth after his kind. And God saw that it was good. And God said, Let us make man in our image after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. And God blessed them, And God said unto them, Be fruitful, and multiply, and replenish the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. And God said, Behold, I have given you every herb bearing seed, which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree in the which is the fruit of a tree yielding seed. To you it shall be for meat. And to every beast of the earth, and to every fowl of the air, and to everything that creepeth upon the earth wherein there is life, I have given every green herb for meat. And it was so. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And the evening and the morning were the 6th day.
Thank you for listening to this recording of the King James Bible produced by Audio Scriptures International. Audio Scriptures International believes it is more important to spread the Word of God than to make a large profit. Please feel free to make copies of these recordings and distribute them freely so long as you adhere to the following guidelines. First, you may not charge any more than the cost to duplicate and send them. Secondly, you must make a complete copy of the recording, including this message. For commercial and fundraising distribution, please contact Audio Scriptures International for additional information.